Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the Answer Company. The Division Championship Minnesota Twins are looking to go all the way to the World Series in 2024. Bolstered by inspirational shortstop Carlos Correa, a healthy Brian Buxton, and rookie phenom Royce Lewis, plus a pitching staff led by Pablo Lopez and an outstanding bullpen featuring Johan Duran, the Twins are the best bargain in the major leagues, and Target Field is the best venue in baseball. Sheridan Dulas & Kins, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm, has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009, Sheridan Dulas & Kins are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. It's a real pleasure to welcome back to our studio a return visitor and a very dear friend of mine and a former colleague of mine, Jeannie Entenza. Jeannie, welcome to Access to Democracy.
Great to be here, Steve.
So I should tell our viewers, you and I met about, I think it's now 15 years ago, approximately.
Yeah.
My, how the time flies. We both were working at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. You were the Deputy Public Policy Director.
That's right.
And I was working on federal policy issues for the council, and we've been friends ever since.
Yep, still collaborating.
That's right. Wonderful to have you on the show
Thank
today.
you.
Since you were on our show last, there have been some developments in your career that are most interesting. You are now delving into diplomacy as a citizen diplomat. Specifically, you are now the Honorary Consul of Iceland to Minnesota and North Dakota. Did I state that correctly?
Correct, yes.
Do I need to address you as Your Excellency?
You should.
You like that title. That sounded good. So I'm curious, how did you come to be appointed Honorary Consul of Iceland?
Oh, that's a good question, Steve. It is humbling, actually, to be in this role. I have always been active in the Icelandic American community here, as I grew up in an Icelandic settlement that was actually called an Icelandic colony. Was settled in 1875 down in southwest Minnesota in the town of Minneota, Minnesota, and produced such luminaries as Bill Holm, the writer that I think you've read, long-term state treasurer Valdimar Bjornsson. The town had an Icelandic newspaper, 3 Icelandic churches, and I had the privilege of growing up on an adjoining farm with my Icelandic grandma and grandpa. So,
and did you hear the Icelandic language being spoken in your home when you were growing up, or at
my grandparents' home?
Yeah.
Yes. So that is some of the internal draw to Iceland. But as a result of a professional exchange in 2017, I was introduced to other professors, that's my day job, who had similar research interests. And so over the years, I've been able to combine the personal draw and professional work, and worked closely with the last council who was appointed for Minnesota and North Dakota, And she moved back to Iceland. And so there was an opening, and I was nominated.
And you have a friendship with the president of Iceland,
I have
as
met the
understand.
president,
You've met the
on
president.
several occasions, and I have been a long-time attender of the Iceland Writers Retreat, which was started by the president's wife long before she was First Lady of Iceland. So that's brought me into their orbit quite a bit. And we're fortunate here in Minnesota. We have a lot of long-standing ties between Iceland and Minnesota. And so past presidents, prime ministers, many dignitaries from Iceland have visited Minnesota specifically.
And we should mention too, you are a frequent visitor to Iceland. I believe, I didn't keep exact count, but I think you made at least 3 or 4 trips to Iceland one year recently, didn't you?
I'll make 4 trips this year,
Yeah.
which will put me over 20 in the last 5 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
So our viewers may be wondering, what do you do as an Honorary Consul of Iceland? What is your function to help Icelanders who may be visiting in Minnesota or living in our state temporarily? What does an Honorary Consul do?
As you surmise, they're excuse me, Icelandic nationals who may be a student at the University of Minnesota, where we have a long-standing exchange program with the University of Iceland, doctors at the Mayo Clinic, tourists, any Icelandic national who is in Minnesota or North Dakota, where there was another colony, if they lose their passport, they can come to me, and I have the authority to issue an emergency passport.
On behalf of the government of
Absolutely.
Iceland.
My role is appointed by the Foreign Ministry of Iceland. And this year is a big election year, not only for us and many countries around the world, but Iceland will be choosing a new president after 8 years of Gudni. So Icelandic nationals who are in Minnesota, if they want to vote, can come to my office and I have ballots.
And they have an election, I assume, also for
June.
the Parliament of Iceland
That
too?
happens on a different rotation.
Different schedule? Okay, but the presidential election
Yes.
occurs in Iceland just
In
this year.
June.
Same as the U.S.
Yes.
has our election in November.
Correct.
Interesting.
Yep.
So are there other types of assistance that you can provide to Icelanders
Yes.
who may need help when they come to Minnesota?
Well, certainly we want to welcome them, and Minnesota is a welcoming place to citizens from all over the world. As I said, we have long-standing connections between Iceland and Minnesota, and so I think Icelanders feel very welcome here. Our climate is similar. I think our culture is similar, and I do my best to make sure they know the resources available to them, to connect them to other Minnesotans, and just give them a good welcome. And then I also can play a role in promoting Icelandic business and industry in our state, because there's some very innovative and exciting work coming out of Iceland that Minnesota and the U.S. can benefit
Which
from.
we'll be talking about more detail in just a few minutes. How many other Americans hold title of Honorary Consul of Iceland in the United States?
In the United States, there's about 18 of us spread out in regional
Where would they be
areas.
approximately? What parts of the country?
Oh,
All over?
the whole country, from Atlanta, Detroit, California, all over the country.
So I'm curious, this influx of Icelandic immigrants who came to America from Iceland in the 19th century.
Correct.
What was the primary motivation for them? Were there events happening back in Iceland, or they wanted a different climate, or was it for agriculture, economic opportunities, all of the above?
All of the above, but particularly they were starving. Like much of Europe at that time, there were famines. One particular event in 1875 resulted in, my ancestors and other people from the northeast part of Iceland came here after the eruption of Askja, a volcano in the central eastern part of Iceland, and the wind blew ash that covered all the land and the sheep and the hay, and people basically had to leave. So there is a ship in the harbor of Vopnafjörður in the northeast, a sculpture that honors the thousands of people who left from that harbor and stopped in the UK, over to Canada, and on down to Minnesota. So they never went through Ellis Island. They came through Canada.
Interesting. Jeannie, do you have an approximate idea of how many Americans today can trace their heritage to Iceland?
Oh, that's a good question for Ancestry.com, which I have verified all my credentials.
Right.
You know, in the thousands, easily. There were 800, I think, in Minnesota, almost as many up in North Dakota. Salt Lake City had a big settlement. Seattle had a big settlement. Door County in Wisconsin. So that's not a number I've tried to get, but I could get back to you.
That's okay. I was just curious if you knew. I'm curious about language too. There is an Icelandic language.
Absolutely.
You have been studying the Icelandic language. Say something about that.
Well, it is one of their, you know, legacies, something they have national pride about, as well as the sagas, right? These are the people who wrote the sagas in medieval times. Many of them are housed at the University of Iceland. Some they are still trying to get back from Denmark, who ruled them for a time. So language and literature, they're actually a UNESCO City of Literature. Because of that strong history. Today, the writing profession is very renowned and supported in Iceland and popular, especially the Scandi noir kinds of genres. And it's something now they are working to protect the language from English and the ease of the internet and how the world has opened to their young people, because we're just even more connected these days.
So Jeannie, correct me if I'm mistaken about this, but I've sort of had the understanding that the Icelandic language, linguistically speaking, is very close to the Norse languages, such as Norwegian,
correct.
Danish, maybe even Swedish or Finnish. Am I correct in that assumption?
You are. It is a Germanic language. Some people just call it Old Norse because of their isolation geographically. You know, they're not, you know, they are separated as an island from Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway. So in some ways it has changed less. And it's a fascinating language with a very complex grammatical structure.
Let's cover a few of the basics about Iceland. I feel like we're sort of in a geography mode today. We know that it's in the North Atlantic Ocean between the United States and Canada and Europe.
Correct.
South of Greenland, if you will, sort of southeast of Greenland, and to the west of the British Isles. What's the approximate population of Iceland and how big is it? What's the size of the country?
This may surprise you because there are less than 400,000 people in Iceland. So it's a country that punches above its weight in many, many ways.
My goodness, that's fewer people than live in a corner of the Twin Cities metro area.
Correct.
Wow.
They are a high-functioning, high-income, high-service society,
literate.
Extremely literate, you know, culturally advanced, and a world player in international politics. Partly because of their location in the Arctic. We know, you know, there are 8 countries, including the U.S., we have Alaska, who, you know, whose land touches the Arctic Circle.
Right.
And Russia being about half of that, but they're not being invited to the table right now so much due to their attack on the Ukraine.
On the Ukraine.
So issues of Arctic security are important. Issues of climate change. We know that lands in the Arctic are experiencing climate change at a rate 4 times any other place in the world.
And we're talking specifically about sea ice that is melting, opening up new routes for navigation through Arctic waters north of Iceland?
Absolutely. They held a funeral for a glacier, in fact, to drive this point home. And one of their esteemed writers and public speakers wrote a plaque, and you know they noted the place where that glacier used to be. So that's something that's taken very seriously there.
Iceland has been in the news frequently over the past couple of years because of its topography, specifically volcanic eruptions.
Correct.
And I'm not even going to attempt on this program to pronounce the names of some of these volcanoes that have erupted recently. But you brought a book today that you might want to hold up, and
Sure.
I think there were a
It's got
couple of
great
pictures you wanted to
picture, if you
show.
can see that.
There have been some people who've been saying, well, the volcanoes are erupting on Iceland, and so it's not safe to go to the country, but that's not true, is it?
That is not true. And this Iceland, which is in Geldingadalur, it is active. It's an area of the country, a peninsula that had been dormant for 800 years. So it is close to the Blue Lagoon that many of your viewers might know of.
May
It
be
is
familiar
close
with.
to Keflavik Airport, but it is not interfering in air traffic in any way. This is not an ash spewing volcano like we saw 10, 15 years ago that
Which affected
halted all
air traffic across
to
the
Europe.
North Atlantic.
Correct.
Right, right.
This is not that. It's there are eruptions. It is a long fissure. You know, something viewers may not realize is Iceland sits on a hot pot and is at where the tectonic plates between North America and Europe are shifting. So the country is very much alive in many, many ways, and geology is certainly one of them. But this volcano, which is in its fourth or fifth eruption since 2021, so that activity will probably continue, but does not pose a risk. In fact, it's quite a spectacle to see. So I would encourage your viewers to think about going, but then going in a safe way.
Right.
This is man against nature, and you don't want to take your chances around hot lava. But there are many places where you can view the eruption safely. And in fact, in July, I was there taking language classes, and in Reykjavik, which is like 40 miles away, and I could see the eruption from my apartment window.
Your point about being safe when you go to these locations, I'm aware of that from being a frequent visitor to the Hawaiian Islands,
Yes.
specifically the Big Island of Hawaii, which at the same time we have the volcanoes erupting in Iceland, Kilauea on the Big Island of
Right.
Hawaii has also been very active and drawn lots of people to go see it. It's relatively easy now for Minnesotans to get to Iceland, isn't it?
Direct flights, many days of the
Iceland
year.
Airlines,
Iceland
Icelandic
Airline.
Airlines and Delta both
Yes,
fly
both
to
daily
Reykjavik.
flights, especially seasonal between late April, May to September.
How long a flight is it approximately?
6 hours.
Not bad.
Not
yeah.
bad at all. Not bad at all.
You can leave the Twin Cities, I'm assuming, in the evening and wake up the
right.
next morning in Iceland.
That's exactly how it works.
Let's talk about a recent UN report that came out which identified Iceland as one of the happiest countries in the world. The report made news because it said that the U.S. had slipped out of the rankings of top happiness countries and had gone down a few notches. So what is it? Why do you think Icelanders are such happy people, according to this UN report?
You know, Steve, I think, and we noticed that many of the Nordic countries rank fairly highly. And I actually did my dissertation research when I got my doctorate on the nonprofit sector in Iceland, but that allowed me to kind of look at how do people spend their time. And the collective nature of a social democratic society like any of the Nordic countries really comes through in their nonprofit sector. So when you live in a country where access to healthcare is a guaranteed right, access to education, even higher education, then the nonprofits get to be arts organizations, cultural organizations, expressive. They're not trying to necessarily fill the gaps as we do here around some of those important issues like mental health or healthcare.
So very similar culturally or politically, if you will, to the Scandinavian countries.
Exactly.
Norway, Denmark, Sweden,
Exactly.
Finland.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the similarities. I think, and your experience in Hawaii may echo this, I think when people live on an island, there's extreme feelings of independence and self-reliance.
Right.
And they don't look to the rest of the world to create their happiness, right? So, and I just think when you have art and literature like the Icelanders do, and music and hiking, they're very much an outdoors kind of country. I think one of the things Americans can really enjoy when they visit is all the outdoor nature, scenery, glaciers, volcanoes, the sea, mountains. It's just a stunningly beautiful country, and opportunities to hike are endless.
I very much want to visit someday. I look forward to it because I've heard about the Blue Lagoon, I've seen photos of it, but I've seen a lot more than that too. It seems like a remarkable country, and as we just said, so accessible to people from Minnesota and the Twin Cities in particular.
And I would add, the tourists know about Blue Lagoon,
Right.
but every city, the smallest fishing village will have a pool, an outdoor pool, and this is natural, hot, thermal water, clean, coming right out of natural springs. And that's a large part, back to your happiness question. People start their day in the pool or end their day in the pool, and that's where politics are discussed and families.
Maybe we should try
end their
that here in
day.
the U.S.
I
It might
think
lead to more productive political conversations.
I think there's something to be gained by that.
So I want to ask you, Jeannie, about some of the connections between businesses in Iceland and Minnesota. Tell us about a couple of these. Specifically, there's an Icelandic company that is using fish skin to help treat burn victims. Tell us about this company and what their role is in Minnesota.
And I think another thing Iceland is known for is looking for sustainable solutions to pressing issues. So, you know, due to a variety of reasons, right? People have accidents, there are explosions, whatever. So we have, you know, people who've suffered serious burn wounds, and fishing is obviously a big industry in a country like Iceland on the North Atlantic. And there were many parts of the fish that are used, and they export much fish to the rest of the world.
And to Europe and
to
the
Europe,
US,
absolutely. But they were throwing away the skins. And Fertram, the owner and CEO of Kerecis, Kercis, just created Iceland's first, what they call unicorn, their first company that sold for over $1 billion US to a Danish company, which will expand their reach around the world. But Minnesota, being known for the Mayo, for the University of Minnesota and Medical Alley, and all our emphasis on healthcare in Minnesota, is an exact beautiful place to put an office, and they have done that.
Wow.
And
how many jobs here in
that
Minnesota?
I don't know, because they're ramping up.
Just starting.
Starting in the last year. So be amazing opportunities for innovation and research, and most importantly, care to individuals who have undergone serious trauma.
And there are some other Icelandic businesses that are already doing business here too?
Oh, absolutely. And they're, again, on the more environmental side, there are carbon capture companies doing testing in northern Minnesota, putting carbon into rock for storage.
Wow.
So we don't have enough time in the day for me to tell you more, but those are two really, I think, exciting
That's very exciting. It sounds like they're really on the cutting edge of science here and doing really interesting things. Well, our time is starting to wind down, but I didn't want to leave today without touching on your career in the nonprofit sector and academia. We've been talking up to now mostly about Iceland, but you've really had a distinguished career, Jeannie, in the nonprofit sector, certainly during the years I've known you, and continue to grow and do new things. In 2021, you were a Fulbright specialist. What did you do as a Fulbright specialist?
So I used that support from Fulbright, who is, you know, interested in promoting international exchange at a professional and academic level. And I used that time to work with two professors at the University of Iceland, and that's what led to the research I did for my dissertation, where we mapped the nonprofit sector in Iceland.
Very interesting. And then you've also been a contributing author to a number of publications, including the Nonprofit Handbook, where you worked with our dear friend and my former colleague, Marcia Avner, And you've also recently accepted a new assignment at the University of Minnesota at the Humphrey Institute.
Yes.
Tell us,
Yes,
you're
I'm
back to teaching at the Humphrey Institute.
Very excited about that. So, you know, before I met you, Steve, when we were in the world of public policy, my career had been as a practitioner and working in service delivery, human services, nonprofits here and other states. And that work really informed how I looked at our systems and what we need to do at a policy level to make the world better for people. And so now, after completing my own doctorate and combining the theoretical elements of doctoral research with a practitioner career, I'm extremely excited to be at our landmark institution, the University of Minnesota, specifically the Humphrey School of Public Policy, teaching social policy, policy implementation.
Really helping train the next generation of nonprofit leaders, which you also did previously at Hamline University, where
I did.
I was an adjunct professor for a while, and you were teaching there too and helping run the nonprofit program at Hamline.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's very exciting, because I think all of us have had people in our careers who have been mentors that we weren't able to achieve much without having good mentors and people who could help guide us along the way. And now that you're playing that role too, I think is really an exciting thing, remarkable.
It is, and I remember the first time a student looked at me and asked me about my career, much in the way I had looked at Marcia Avner in my earlier public policy career. So I think to be able to inspire others, and at a time when our country feels so divided, to have avenues of expression and inclusion
right.
and engagement, frankly, because this is a time for us to engage when many feel like they might want to disengage.
That's a very good point. So when you look back at your experience in teaching and working as a public policy advocate in the nonprofit sector, what do you think the most important thing is about nonprofits that our viewers need to know and understand?
Well, much like your name of the show here, I strongly feel that the work of nonprofits is the work of democracy. Nonprofits is the vehicle for regular people to come together and solve problems. And that's part of our national heritage as a country. That was documented very early on by a young French thinker, de Tocqueville, yes,
right.
who came and observed our very young democracy and noted how different that was from Europe, and France in particular, that had a very strong administrative state.
Right.
So that's our heritage, and I think democracy is alive and well, and we need to protect it and keep moving.
And I'm sort of paraphrasing him here because I don't have the exact quote, but de Tocqueville said something along the lines of, Americans see a problem and they set out as a community to address the problem or to solve it. And it expresses this idea that we accomplish more when we work collectively together to try to solve problems than just leaving it to individuals to fend for themselves, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really important. Any final thoughts that you want to share with us today?
Buy your ticket to Iceland.
You've got me sold. I'm ready to pack my bags. I've just come back, as you know, from a lengthy trip to Southeast Asia, but I'm always ready to hop on a plane and
Yeah,
get
this won't be
going
as
again.
warm, but.
Yeah, this won't be as warm as Singapore and Cambodia and
Right.
Vietnam.
But I know many of us Minnesotans, myself included, have kind of been missing the snow and the white. So there's nothing like standing on a glacier to get that cold Arctic feeling.
Yeah. Jeannie Entenza, Honorary Consul of Iceland to Minnesota and North Dakota, and longtime advocate, activist in the nonprofit sector, teacher at the Humphrey Institute. Thank you for being our guest on Access to Democracy. Thank you for being such a great friend over these many years.
Oh, thank you, Steve.